I have a rendezvous with death. We'll preserve the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
No fear. No political correctness. No wokeism. You're listening to Underground USA.
Since Donald Trump's emergence on the political stage, a deep state-induced and media-supported force de jour has gripped a significant swath of the American population, particularly those ensconced in the Progressive and Democratic Socialist camps. Trump Derangement Syndrome describes an irrational, visceral hatred of President Trump that transcends policy and political disagreements and veers into unhinged obsession, emotional instability, and a rejection of reason itself. Far from a mere political buzzword, Trump Derangement Syndrome has roots in established psychological principles, groupthink, cognitive dissonance, and tribal identity, and its spread reveals the rot at the core of progressive ideology. Worse, it poses a direct threat to the United States' foundational principles of individualism and liberty, corroding discourse and empowering collectivist dogma over personal freedom. Trump Derangement Syndrome isn't just hyperbole slung by opportunistic right-wing pundits. It's an observable condition marked by an inability to engage rationally with Mr. Trump or anything associated with him. A perfect example was Democrats' inability to acknowledge a young boy who had beaten cancer or the parents of slain children during Trump's speech to the joint session of Congress. Sufferers exhibit symptoms ranging from pious, self-righteous indignation, like the aforementioned, to unhinged rants on social media and outright denial of reality when confronted with Trump's achievements, like economic growth pre-COVID, or the Middle East peace deals. The term, first popularized during the 2016 campaign, captures how otherwise functional adults devolve into frothing ideologues at the mere mention of his name. It's not about policy critique. Reasonable people can debate cutting fraud and waste, tax cuts, or border security. It's about a Pavlovian meltdown triggered by Trump's persona. Progressives and Democratic Socialists who fancy themselves champions of tolerance and nuance are Trump Derangement Syndrome's primary vectors. Their reaction isn't rooted in Trump's actions alone, but in what he represents, a brash, unapologetic rejection of their sanctimonious worldview. Trump's refusal to bow to political correctness or genuflect before the altar of collectivist orthodoxy and cultural Marxism sends them into a tailspin, exposing the fragility of their ideology itself. What's billed as moral outrage is often just psychological overload, an inability to reconcile their self-image as enlightened saviors with a reality that doesn't bend to their whims. Trump Derangement Syndrome isn't a random outburst. It's a textbook case of psychological mechanisms gone haywire, fueled by the usual suspect echo chambers of progressive thought. Start with groupthink, the phenomenon where conformity trumps critical thinking, no pun intended. In leftist enclaves, be it academia, media, or urban bubbles, or the smoky back rooms of K Street, dissenting from the anti-Trump narrative is social suicide. The result? A hive-mind conviction that Trump is not just wrong, but evil incarnate, with no room for debate. This isn't principled opposition. It's a cult-like obsession where questioning the orthodoxy risks excommunication, and the telegraphing of that cult-like mindset onto those free from Trump Derangement Syndrome is tantamount to mandatory. Then there's cognitive dissonance, the mental strain of holding conflicting beliefs. Progressives pride themselves on being the party of science and compassion, yet Trump's electoral success and policy wins, like record low minority unemployment, clash with their worldview of him being a bumbling bigot, Rather than adjust their worldview, they double down, concocting elaborate conspiracies. Russian collusion, anyone? Or dismissing facts outright. This isn't reason. It's a tantrum of the petulant dressed up as analysis. Finally, tribal identity seals the deal. Democratic socialism thrives on dividing the world into oppressors and oppressed, a Marxist tenet, with Trump cast as the ultimate oppressor. For the progressive faithful, hating him isn't just politics, it's a badge of pseudo-moral superiority. This tribalism blinds them to their own contradictions, championing diversity while demanding lockstep conformity, or preaching equity when sneering at working-class voters who back Trump, or lauding transparency while attacking Elon Musk for finding waste, corruption, and fraud in the departments and agencies of Deep State Washington, D.C., and its manufactured NGO world. Psychologically, Trump Derangement Syndrome is less about Trump and more about the left's need to cling to a crumbling identity as society's self-appointed guardians. Trump Derangement Syndrome isn't just a personal quirk. It's a wrecking ball smashing through America's civic fabric. The United States was built on debate, compromise, and a shared commitment to democratic norms, values progressives claim to uphold but abandon the moment Trump enters the frame. Their derangement has poisoned discourse, turning politics into a screaming match where facts are optional and opponents are dehumanized. When less than funny late-night talk show hosts, journalists, and politicians alike spend years fixating on Trump's every tweet instead of substantive issues, they don't just dumb down the public. They serve as the toadies of the American fifth column, eroding trust in institutions already on life support. Worse, Trump Derangement Syndrome fuels a dangerous polarization that threatens national unity. By painting Trump and his supporters, literally half the country, as irredeemable fascists, progressives justify any tactic to quote-unquote save democracy, from censoring speech to weaponizing federal agencies to the rationalization of violence and worse. The 2020 riots, egged on by leftist rhetoric about systemic evil, weren't a cry for justice, but a symptom of a nation unmoored by irrational hatred. Democratic socialists like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Squad, political opportunists like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, and throwbacks to the 1960s like U.S. Representative Al Green, cheer this violence and celebrate the chaos, dreaming of a collectivist utopia rising from the ashes. But the reality is a fractured America. This obsession also hands foreign adversaries a gift-wrapped advantage. While China builds its global influence and Russia probes our weaknesses, Trump Derangement Syndrome keeps America's elites fixated on a non-existent domestic boogeyman. The progressive fixation on Trump as the root of all evil distracts from real threats, leaving the nation vulnerable. It's no coincidence that the same voices shrieking about Trump's every move stay silent on Beijing's atrocities, like the practice of slave labor and human oppression, and their expansionist policies of conquest internationally. Their moral compass is too warped by derangement to see beyond their own psychoses. At its core, Trump Derangement Syndrome is a dagger aimed at individualism, the bedrock of American identity. Progressivism and democratic socialism despise the rugged, self-reliant character that built this country, favoring instead a nanny state version where the collective eclipses the person. Trump, for all his flaws, embodies individualism, unpolished, defiant, and allergic to groupthink. His very existence challenges the progressive dogma that individuals must submit to a totalitarian definition of the greater good as defined by coastal elites and socialist ideologues. Trump Derangement Syndrome amplifies this hostility by reducing people to their tribal affiliations. If you support Trump, you're not an individual with reasoned views. You're a racist, a deplorable, a threat to be crushed. This collectivist lens, again rooted in Marxism, obliterates personal agency, demanding conformity to the anti-Trump crusade or outright ostracism. It's a psychological straitjacket, and progressives wield it gleefully, oblivious to the irony of their inclusion crusade punishing independent thought. The economic fallout is just as grim. Democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders and AOC exploit Trump Derangement Syndrome to push policies, Green New Deals, wealth taxes, the centralization of government at the federal level, that stomp on individual achievement. Their argument hinges on fear-mongering. Trump's capitalist excess must be reined in by state control. Never mind that his tax cuts spurred growth while their schemes tanked economies from Caracas to Havana. Trump Derangement Syndrome blinds them to evidence, letting ideology override the individual's right to prosper free of government shackles. Liberty, America's lifeblood, fares no better under Trump Derangement Syndrome. The deranged left's reaction to Trump has birthed a censorship culture that would make Orwell blush. Social media bans, disinformation task forces, and cancel and doxing campaigns, all justified by the need to stop Trump's dangerous influence. It all chips away at free speech. Progressives who once claimed to defend the First Amendment are now so affected by Trump Derangement Syndrome that it forces the revelation of their true colors. Liberty's fine until it clashes with their agenda. This authoritarian streak extends to the state itself. The Russia hoax, the impeachment circuses, the criminal January 6th overreach, each was a Trump Derangement Syndrome-fueled power grab, bending legal norms to get Trump. Democratic socialists cheer these moves, dreaming of a government strong enough to enforce their pseudo-utopia. But liberty isn't a bargaining chip. Once eroded, it's gone. The more Trump Derangement Syndrome drives progressives to sacrifice rights for revenge, the closer we edge to a system where dissent itself is criminalized. Even the concept of personal responsibility, a liberty cornerstone, crumbles under Trump Derangement Syndrome. By blaming Trump for every ill, from the pseudoscience of climate change to COVID deaths, progressives absolve individuals of accountability. It's not your job to adapt or innovate. It's Trump's fault, and the state must fix it. This victimhood cult, supercharged by derangement, breeds dependence, not freedom, a perfect fit for socialism's totalitarian and soul-crushing embrace. Trump Derangement Syndrome isn't a psychological curiosity. It's a progressive-spawned cancer eating away at America's soul. Rooted in neo-Marxian groupthink, dissonance, and tribal rage, it turns reasonable people into pawns of a collectivist agenda undermining the nation's unity, individualism, and liberty. Democratic socialism thrives on this chaos, exploiting Trump Derangement Syndrome to peddle its tired gospel of control and conformity, both tenets of communism itself. Now, the antidote isn't blind loyalty to President Trump, although his agenda and policies are much more aligned to the Constitution than what the neo-Marxist left has to offer. The antidote is a return to reason, debating ideas with facts and truth, not demonizing people. America's greatness lies in its rejection of ideological monoliths and its embrace of the individual over the mob. Progressives and their socialist kin won't see that. They can't see that. Their derangement blinds them. But for those who still value liberty, Trump Derangement Syndrome is a warning. Let it fester, and the land of the free becomes a footnote in history. My friends, It's time to win the hearts and minds of the rank-and-file Democrats, forcing the far-left American fifth column to stand alone in their dwindling numbers. It can happen, but we have to address the psychosis in the room for it to happen. When we come back, our segment on America's Third Watch, broadcast nationally from our flagship station, WGUL AM 930 and FM 93.7 in Tampa, Florida.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Wokeism is a threat to the very foundations of our great nation and to the very principles of liberty and justice. The goal of wokeism is to divide us, pitting Americans against one another based on race, gender, and identity. This ideology undermines free speech and open dialogue, which are the bedrock of our republic. It promotes censorship and cancels anyone who dares to challenge its extreme agenda. We must stand against this cultural Marxism and protect our constitutional rights. Say no to wokeism.
News, insight, passion. AM 930, The Answer.
Well, I hope that you had a great weekend and that we're ready for liftoff here this week. But you know, Frank, we've got a new prime minister that's going to be coming in to office here very soon to replace Justin Trudeau in Canada. His name is Mark Carney. He's a former central banker, and he had some very hot words for Donald Trump at his speech earlier.
A capital M meh to that.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and say whatever you want. The two economies are very, very different. And we're going to feel the threat of what he said much less than what Canadians will feel. Yeah. People have to remember this too. Everybody's getting their undies in a bunch about the tariffs. These are reciprocal tariffs that Donald Trump is talking about. And what does that mean? It means when you look at certain things that we trade in with Canada, they've got some tariffs on American goods that are upwards of 235%. What Donald Trump is saying is, if you're going to charge us tariffs, then we're going to have the same tariffs. We're going to place tariffs on you to equate that trade balance, so there's no imbalance there when it comes to the cost of things. If you're going to gouge us, we're going to gouge you back. So don't gouge us, we won't gouge you. So when people get really upset about 25% tariffs for Canadians, it's going to ruin the economy. How does 235% not hurt us?
Right. Oh, that's right. Well, Carney actually was saying that Trump is attacking the families or whatever and this kind of thing. And so, again, very, very tense words. But, yeah, when you look at it in perspective and the fact that they're reciprocal, yeah, all that can go away pretty easily if the other country drops down its tariffs.
Yeah, it's just being honest. I know that's just not heard of today in politics, but we've got to be a little bit more accurate, and our media is completely delinquent on that. Just completely. They couldn't report honestly from a non-biased point of view if guns were held to heads. It just doesn't happen. So the obligation to find out the truth falls on the public. So when you hear the tariffs and you see the pearl clutchers out there, it's going to ruin everything. All he's saying is we're going to raise tariffs on countries to equalize everything because they haven't been fair to us. And again, I used the example of 235% on some goods for U.S. goods going into Canada.
Mm-hmm.
We can't get upset about 25%. Look, in the face of 235, it's grossly inequitable. And that's what Trump means when he keeps saying we've been getting the short end of the deal around the world when it comes to trade. Because countries around the world have been pulling this forever. We are a consumer economy. The world needs us as a trading partner much worse than we need them. That sounds isolationist, but it's not.
Just a fact. Yeah.
It's just a fact. So when does the world start treating us fairly?
Yes, exactly. And of course, one of the things President Trump's trying to do is get manufacturing or investment to come back into the country. In fact, Howard Lutnick was saying, he was interviewed on NBC, and he said, look, people were betting against Donald Trump a while back, thinking he wouldn't even, win for one thing or even really be the nominee. And so don't bet against Trump. In other words, he's playing a longer game here than the typical thing where the Democrats say, he's crashing the economy today. Look what happened today. But wait a minute, just wait a little bit and let this play out. And we'll have some great audio of Democrats saying the sky is falling.
It's a corrective agenda. For so long, we have just been doing the tax and spend. Let's just ramp up the deficit. Let's just ramp up the debt. Don't worry about it. We'll deal with it tomorrow. Well, you know what? There's longevity in human life. And you think about it, a lot of these Democrats who you saw in their pink jumpsuits with the ping pong paddles last week,
right?
Who couldn't clap for a kid with cancer, they're in their 80s. They're not going to be around to see the ramifications of what they vote as far as spending is concerned. They've already given it to their grandkids. They don't care.
So what do you think about the Iranian mullahs and the supreme leader? He's basically saying, watch out. We don't want them to impose their expectations on us. I don't know if they're going to have a real choice with Donald Trump.
No, Donald Trump just wants to make sure that they don't have a nuclear weapon.
Yep.
That's just the way that is. Nobody in the world wants these maniacs to have a nuclear weapon. They subsidize and use Hezbollah as a part of their Iranian Revolutionary Guard. It's a terrorist organization. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard is deemed an international terrorist organization by the West and the free world. So only the terminally insane would want Iran to have nuclear weapons. That said, if I'm the chief poobah over there in the mullah, sitting in my robes atop my hill where I throw gay people off roofs over there for just being gay, and cane women because they're not wearing hijabs, I should be more worried about Israel, because if Mr. Trump has given a green light to Israel to take care of Hamas, Hezbollah is very close behind. And if that's the case, Israel's not going to allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and they're not going to do it through diplomacy. So, Mr. Mullah, you can saber rattle all you want at your Friday, let's get together and condemn the great Satan, but I'd be a little more concerned about a really tiny little country in your backyard that's got the capability of wiping you off the face of the planet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and again, a lot of this, this is another one of the dumpster fires that's been going on, and Trump has got to deal with that at the same time of dealing with the Ukraine-Russia war, dealing with the economy, dealing with the border. I mean, any number of things that we could talk about, but even just dealing with Iran seems, to be a pretty heavy-duty job.
Well, really, when you think about it, and you look at the actualities, especially in Washington, D.C., the impediment to dealing with Iran definitively comes from Congress. You know, they've got a contingent on the far left that is pretty much pro-Islamo-fascist.
Yeah.
Which is stunning, given the fact that we survived 9/11 the way we did. You would think maybe we could have a cohesive thought pattern on, well, let's see, Islamo-fascist terrorism is bad. And even a second grader can figure out that Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism around the world. Maybe we should have a cohesive policy against them. But we actually had an administration not too long ago that just threw money at them. As a matter of fact, we had two administrations that just threw money at them. Mm-hmm. You know, so you've got to wonder about the intellectual quotients about some of the people in Congress, or did the Obama administration? And you think about this: how did Omar, how did Tlaib, how did they get elected to Congress? Well, they came from congressional districts that were flooded with refugees from Palestine and Somalia, and those are both Islamic nations. So when you look at Tlaib and you look at Omar, you need to ask yourself a very solemn and sobering question: Are they Islamo-fascist sympathetic? Mm-hmm. And if they are, isn't the enemy within the gates?
Yeah, that is a real concern. You know, and I think even when you look at what President Trump's options are as commander-in-chief, you know, you already have cells, or you have others, even people that came across the border, you know, just literally walked across the border, Chinese nationals as well. I mean, the list just goes on. And given there's some kind of hostilities, it's not just over there. And it actually, Frank, to me, it gives a sort of a chilling effect with what Zelensky said in the Oval Office, saying, oh, you've got these oceans, but soon you will feel it. I didn't like that. I didn't care for what he said, obviously, but I wonder if he was alluding to something like that.
No, I mean, if that's the case, then he's about 15 years short of being with the program. We already know that Hamas and Hezbollah have partnered in the tri-country territories in South America to be money laundering institutions. You know, we know this, and we found propaganda from Hezbollah on the border at crossing points that are popular with the mules from South America and Mexico. So we know that there is a threat, and that was one of the reasons a lot of people who are aware were absolutely furious with the Biden administration and the Obama administration when it came to the open borders policy. Mm-hmm. We do not live in a safe world. We live in a dangerous world. And when 19 people can overextend their student visas from a foreign country, from the Middle East, and figure out how to get lessons on how to fly Boeing aircraft, you know, and then slam them in the towers, you know, how many times do you need that slap in the face before you realize that's not a good thing? Do we want to lose close to 3,000 people every 10 years because we were stupid? I'm not game for that. Donald Trump's not game for that. Iran's game for that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think Trump's going to have, I think he's starting to talk again, I think, about some travel bans as well, just like before. Yeah.
We should be looking at who's into the country, and travel bans. You know, if a country gets together every Friday for prayer and screams they want to wipe you off the face of the earth, why would you want them coming into your country?
That's right.
You know, I don't get that. I don't understand that. We're not saying that, you know, we're your enemy. We want to attack you and obliterate you. We're saying, as long as you're saying, I hate you and I want to come to your country, how am I supposed to trust you're going to be here peacefully?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Isn't it interesting? A lot of that's been so sort of cooked out of our thought process. This idea that, well, I mean, that's their thing. I mean, we can't discriminate against their belief or that kind of stuff. It's that kind of mentality. But what you're talking about is, no, they're very practical about this. They really actually mean it. It's not some sort of esoteric, spiritual thing.
Let's analogize about this a little bit. You have people on the far left who defend pedophilia as some sort of naturally occurring psychological malady. And we should be understanding. And I for one, am not. I think it's one of the lowest things that can ever happen. And I think if somebody is convicted of pedophilia, there should be the harshest of penalties. You can read into that what you want. But you get these people who defend this and try to rationalize this with their truth, quote unquote. Move pedophilias right next door to them when they have small children and see how that song changes.
Right.
Are they going to have their neighbors babysitting for their kids?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. That's the hypocrisy of this self-righteous crap that the far left preaches all the time.
Yeah, but like you and I would have to deal with that, but they don't want to deal with that. But they'll impose it on us.
That's right. And the same thing goes for immigration and people visiting. The same deal.
Frank, there was an interesting article that came out, and it had to do with the Heritage Foundation. They've got a thing within them called the Oversight Project, and they figured out about all these Biden documents, the ones they could get their hands on. They all seem to have been signed with the same auto pen signature, which begs the question, who was actually running things in the Biden administration? Who was signing the executive orders and everything?
Well, I think we in the spirit of being honest, a lot of presidents use the auto pen.
Sure.
So it's not something that's, he used an auto pen. We can't do that. That said, because of the outward cognitive decline that Biden had, it does raise suspicions about its use so often during his tenure, especially in the last 2 years of his administration. So it's right to ask that. Was the auto pen used without his knowledge? That's the big one here. Because if it was used without his knowledge, if everything that was signed with an auto pen didn't have his approval, then we have to ask that question, who was running the show? And, it doesn't take a psychologist to realize that Biden wasn't there for the last 3 years. He wasn't really there for all 4 years. Not 100% of the time. It happened at some point at the end of his run for the presidency, and everybody saw it. Everybody saw something happened. Was it a stroke? Was he impaired with that? Or did dementia just actually full throttle at some point? But before he took office, something happened, and everybody saw it. So, it's a legitimate question. Who was running the show? And when you understand that Obama 2.0 was in control, and I'm not saying that just because I dislike Barack Obama, although I find that he's the genesis for most of the problems that we're facing with today as far as division is concerned, and that goes double for what we're having to deal with around the world. Mm-hmm. It's the people that were in the Biden administration. Almost 100% of them were holdovers from the Obama administration. They were brought back in. If they didn't actually figure out a way to continue to exist in the administration through the Trump years, because there was no definitive culling in the first Trump administration. He tried to do what most Republican presidents do, and that's saying, okay, let's sprinkle the infield. I represent everybody. That's always a mistake after someone like Barack Obama or Joe Biden. You must cull the entire roster, because that's what they do. They called the entire roster and put in people who are loyal to them. But you say loyal when you're talking about Donald Trump or a Republican, and you're a fascist.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's the Third Reich all over again.
Yeah, you can't have people. He wants loyalists in there. What kind of an imbecile doesn't want someone who's loyal?
That's right. Or how about this one? When you talk about wanting to bring back manufacturing, or you think about how much the countries are charging us, now you're a nationalist. You're some kind of, you know what I mean? It's always some kind of name that you get called. It's supposed to shut everything down. It's like, oh, don't call me that. I'll just forget what I said.
And then for some reason, we're supposed to believe that the word nationalist is like Nazi.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's that connotation, and they're happy to have that connotation, but we're here to correct things like that.
Yeah, well, maybe it's because it begins with an N. I don't know.
That's it, probably.
But because we don't teach history and civics anymore in high school to any meaningful degree, the words fascist and Nazi don't mean anything to anybody anymore, especially the generations coming up, because it's never been explained to them. They don't know what Mussolini's politics were. They don't know what Hitler's politics were that made them nationalists and fascists, and what communism is and what socialism is. Communist Manifesto. Say it to somebody who's a senior in high school, they'll look at you cross-eyed.
Mm-hmm.
They'll know it's some guy with a beard wrote it, and it's supposed to be pretty cool. But has anybody ever read it? Was it ever studied? Was it ever taught? No, and no. So how can we expect them to understand that it's the bedrock of all things that is evil when it comes to individualism and personal liberty?
Mm-hmm. Or they may say something to you like, well, what we know about it is that it just hasn't been tried right yet.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what some of these Democrats will help us do.
If they'll only do it my way, Ayok says.
Right.
All right, Ayok. If I gave you a chance, would we see some more videos of people dancing down hallways, or those and I'm going to use the word. I don't care how politically incorrect it is, or those retarded avatar punching videos that came out last week?
Yeah, choose your fighter.
Yeah, choose your fighter. Sit down and shut up.
Well, the American people have already chosen their fighter. That's Donald Trump, for one thing.
Yeah, and now you're seeing memes that I think just there's a level of audacity there that I don't even know can be equaled, saying, this is the total number of people who voted for Kamala Harris. This is the total number of people who voted for Donald Trump. And this is the total number of people who didn't vote for anyone. What mandate?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's the thing. What mandate do you have?
Okay, again, shut up and sit down. If we want to talk about that, there was no mandate for Obama. There was no mandate for Clinton. There hasn't been a mandate for a very, very long time, perhaps back to Reagan.
Yeah.
Because half the country doesn't vote.
Well, that's on them. Exactly. Yeah, but you're right, Frank, this idea of the mandate, well, that's because when a Democrat wins, the report from the media at all is you've got a mandate. But if a Republican wins, it's kind of a win. It's not really a win, so there's really no mandate, because it's like an 80% win when a Republican wins.
Hey, Kyle, if you ask Stacey Abrams or Hillary Clinton, there was a mandate that for their point of view, even though they lost. That's how obtuse the thinking is. But thus is, and especially in contemporary times, thus is the insanity of Trump derangement syndrome, which is an actual thing. It's not a caustic remark about someone because of their politics. It's a psychological malady that is a thing. It exists. You could like Trump said during the speech, he could come up with the cure for cancer. And there are some people on the left who would say he's trying to kill people.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing he can do. The Abraham Accords, a better economy, lower unemployment for everybody across the board in every demographic, home ownership rises across the board in every demographic. Not good enough, he's a fascist. Not good enough, he's a Nazi. So we need to define what Trump derangement syndrome is for the people so we can get our head around it, know it fully, and kill it.
Yeah, and exactly. And get it put away because, it is actually hurting a lot of people. It's really kind of sad, but it is a real thing. Yeah.
The world's too serious a place for that kind of stupidity.
You're listening to Underground USA.
A free and independent media is the backbone of our great republic. So it's crucial to have media outlets that aren't influenced by big tech censorship or the leftist mainstream media complex. But that means supporting journalistic outlets that bring us the truth without spinning facts to push a narrative. For less than the cost of a cup of coffee once a month at Starbucks, you can support the free speech mission of undergroundusa.com, an independent, reader-supported, and sometimes irreverent podcast and publication that gives you the real story without the bias. Go to undergroundusa.com/UUSA. That's undergroundusa.com/UUSA to receive a 25% discount on an annual subscription, bringing every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox, circumventing the censors and fact-checkers. Remember, knowledge is power, and staying informed is one of the best ways to protect our republic. Go out there and seek the truth, my friends. Subscribe to undergroundusa.com today.
Before I go, I wanted to build on what I discussed in the opening. How Trump derangement syndrome has expanded into Musk derangement syndrome. For years, the far left clutched their pearls and shrieked into the void about Donald Trump, a man they painted as the ultimate boogeyman of democracy. Trump derangement syndrome erupted as an irrational hatred that turned every tweet, every policy, into an apocalyptic threat. Fast forward to 2025 and the left has a new target, Elon Musk. Call it Musk derangement syndrome, a freshly minted psychosis that's taken root, particularly over Musk's involvement with the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. The transition is as predictable as it is pathetic, a testament to the left's inability to cope with anyone who dares disrupt their sacred bureaucratic swamp. Trump derangement syndrome was never about Trump's policies. It was always about his vibe. Brash, unfiltered, and unapologetic. He didn't play by the rules of the coastal elites, and that drove the tofu-eating neo-Marxian left insane. Now, Musk has stepped into the crosshairs, wielding a similar irreverence but with a twist. He's got the brains and the bankroll to actually dismantle their cherished institutions. Enter DOGE, the Trump-endorsed brainchild tasked with slashing government waste, finding fraud, and eliminating corruption. For progressives, this isn't just a policy disagreement. It's a personal affront. A billionaire daring to touch their corrupt, bloated, taxpayer-funded utopian facade? The Department of Government Efficiency threatens to do what the left fears most: expose the corruption, convoluted money-handling schemes, inefficiency and redundancy propping up their power base. DOGE's mission, to streamline federal spending and cut the fat, flies in the face of the Democrat socialists' gospel of endless government expansion and shadow payrolls for political foot soldiers. Musk, with his track record of revolutionizing industries, isn't some idle dreamer. He's a doer, and that terrifies them. Where Trump derangement syndrome fixated on Trump's bombast, Musk derangement syndrome obsesses over Musk's competence, a man who can't be dismissed as a mere loudmouth. The left's response? Smear, distort, and panic. Scroll through social media, and the symptoms of Musk derangement syndrome are glaring.
Okay, so why should we arrest Elon Musk?
Well, he's a bald-faced criminal. If you or I had walked into the White House and done what he'd done, or walked into the Treasury and done that, we'd be in jail. He essentially organized a fascist coup of our federal government. He spent $250 million to get Trump into office, and now Trump is serving as his proxy, his puppet. How's that different from like George Soros pumping millions into DAs and other political campaigns across America? How's that any different from what billionaire George Soros did? Well, he did not promote the idea of slashing all of our federal benefits. Would you just say that maybe the frustration here is that just because Trump is elected, that's why we're kind of upset at Elon? Because I haven't heard anything fascist in what you're saying. I mean, our kids are struggling here in Oregon. We have some of the worst school numbers, some of the worst test scores. It just came out, Fox 12 just reported that Oregon is falling behind the national average as far as economic boom and population decline. I mean, there's a lot of problems here in Oregon. I mean, are we not concerned about any of that? Of course I'm concerned. How does electing an incompetent, insurrectionist, fascist idiot like Trump going to help that? Well, Trump's not in charge of Oregon. What does that have to do with Oregon's problems, though? What does failing test scores with our kids have to do with Trump and everything? That comes from the Oregon Department of Education. That comes from the legislator. That comes from our governor. I mean, it's all one-party rule kind of right now. Okay, so you're trying to bring it all down to this granular level of specific, tiny little issues. The issue here is we are losing our democracy right now. You think protesting Trump and Musk is more important than what's going on here in Oregon and the failure of our leaders here? Well, everything about what we have here in Oregon as free people is going to be jeopardized by the loss of our democracy at the federal level. So yes. You didn't give me anything arrestable, though. I didn't hear anything. Even a fraction of what he did. Going into the Treasury and well, he was appointed by the president to be the He was not. Trump appointed him. He was not appointed by the Senate. You're not worried about anything in Oregon here? It's all just arrest Musk and Trump? That doesn't make him above the law. What did Elon Musk do to break the law? You have to go and look at what he has done in the last month. And each and every one of those things is something that we would have been arrested for. I'm seriously hoping that you could tell me something so I could be with you and be like, I'm going to hold that sign too if you told me something, but you haven't told me anything. Yes, I have.
Progressives call Musk a fascist for wanting to shrink government. Ironic from a crowd that fetishizes centralized control. They decry his wealth, conveniently forgetting their own donor class of Silicon Valley hypocrites. Posts drip with venom. Musk is destroying democracy, they wail, as if auditing bureaucratic bloat were akin to storming the Bastille. The Atlantic and CNN churn out hit pieces painting Doge as a dystopian plot rather than a pragmatic fix. It's Trump derangement syndrome all over again, hyperbole masquerading as principle. The real kicker? The left's meltdown over Musk reveals their deeper insecurity. Trump was a political lightning rod, easy to rally against. Musk, though, is a harder nut to crack. Self-made, innovative, and unafraid to mock their sanctimony. His quips about government waste, like calling it a giant welfare program for bureaucrats, hit too close to home. Listen to this former federal employee talk about her experiences.
I used to be a federal employee, and I'm going to tell you why I don't feel bad for federal employees being forced to come back into the workplace. I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers for almost a year, and the abuses that I saw by government employees was astounding and shocking. When I was hired, my boss bragged that it was basically impossible to get fired from the federal government, and that in her entire time working for the government, she'd only seen one person fired, and that person assaulted a fellow employee, and she wasn't even fired for assaulting the employee at work. She was fired for lying about it because they caught it on camera. When I worked for the government, we were allowed to work 50% in the office and 50% from home, for the most part. In some cases, if you'd worked there, like I think over 10 years or something, you could actually work from home 3 days a week and work from the office 2 days a week. I use the word work very loosely. One employee spent his time remote working, running his own farm. Another employee bragged about drunk driving and going out to lunch with her friends for margaritas when she was supposed to be remote working. No one would log into their computers, and you can see it because they're not on Teams, and no one ever checked, ever. There's something called the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the work in government is done by 20% of the people, and this is very, very true. People who get a job in the government a lot of times find out that it's very difficult to fire them, and they take advantage of this. One employee would come into the office, his start time would be 6:30, and he knew nobody would be there, and when I came in at 7:30 and I was the next person to come in, he was snoring at his desk every single morning. Another employee would take the government truck on an almost daily basis so that he could go out to lunch and then go and take a nap in his favorite park under a shady tree in the government truck. One of the very first things I did when I started working for the Corps, I spent 3 months cleaning up their real estate files room, which was a disaster. The government is using an antiquated system that was developed sometime in the 90s and using regulations that haven't been updated since the 90s to manage our dams and our government lands. Our government is filled with the most incompetent and most lazy people and an occasional hard worker. And those hard workers are severely punished every time they outwork their colleagues, because then the colleagues realize people will see that they're lazy and they don't want to have to work more. They're just buying time until they retire in almost every case. My point is, some of our government organizations haven't been maintained or updated in so long that you basically need to create a new organization and start from scratch, because there's almost no way to transfer it over, and there's so much red tape in between it'll never get done. So no, I don't think government employees should get the benefit of working from home. We shouldn't have to take years to do anything in a technological age. They choose to take that long. That's a choice. So they can choose to do things faster and more efficiently, and then they can choose to get remote work back. I don't feel bad for them at all.
Doge, under Musk's influence, is unraveling decades of the progressives' expansion of the federal government, exposing the financial feed trough of the deep state bureaucracy and the slush fund for paying Democrat political foot soldiers, and they know it. So they scream louder, hoping volume drowns out reason. In the end, Musk Derangement Syndrome is just Trump Derangement Syndrome with a new face. Same hysteria, different villain. Progressives and Democratic Socialists can't stand losing control, and Musk, with Doge as his weapon, threatens to take it all away. Their derangement isn't about him. It's about what he represents, a rejection of their self-righteous, sanctimonious worldview. Good luck, Elon. Continue the fight. And please, for the love of God, everywhere you go, maintain situational awareness. They're coming for you, my friend, and they have no boundaries.
You're listening to Underground USA.
The foundation of our great nation lies in our unwavering commitment to freedom, and at its core is the principle of free speech. It's not just a right, but a duty to speak our minds, respectfully debate, and challenge ideas. Today, free speech is under attack by the forces of the deep state and the globalists. We must all do our part to protect free speech, for without it, we'd be lost in a sea of woke conformity and censorship. We have the right. Protect it.
If you like the podcast, please head on over to undergroundusa.com and sign up for our Substack. It brings every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox. And do your part to safeguard our republic. talk politics, current events, and even religion with your family, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. When we have these rational, non-aggressive conversations, we realize we have more in common than we have in difference, and that frustrates the balkanizers of the deep state, who must divide us into malleable and excitable chunks in order to cobble together 51% during any given election cycle. When we frustrate the deep state, we hobble the deep state, and that gives the power back to the people where it belongs. It's something we all have to do, all of us. You're listening to Underground USA. No fear, no political correctness, and no wokeism. My name is Frank Salvato.